Well, I'm pleased to be joined today by Alise Mills, a geopolitical fixer, one of the most respected voices in Canadian politics. You've probably seen her talking about politics, for quite some time on CBC. Now she's a big geopolitical fixer. And maybe, Alise, you could describe what you do for people.
Oh, thank you. That's such a nice introduction. Don't know if any of that's really true, but what I do is I work at the intersection of strategic communications, high stakes communications, high value communications with high value, high stakes policy. I've worked in the last 5 years predominantly outside of Canada, beginning in the US. I was with a firm in Washington, D.C. And throughout that, I gathered other clients, including diplomacies within the UK, diplomats within the EU, and then into the Middle East. And then I realized that this was where I was supposed to be. People might remember that most predominantly my last very high profile role in Canada that I think was very public facing was the bombing of Flight 752, Ukraine Airlines 752, Iran. The IRGC had bombed a civilian aircraft outside of Tehran and killed all the passengers who were predominantly Canadians. There were pregnant women on board, there were children on board, and I began pretty much the day after that bombing and stayed with that client for 18 months. And it was one of the most horrible files. It was heart-wrenching. I obviously had to go through the evidence. There's always a discovery process in crisis management, especially when it has a geopolitical component to it, because you're bringing in international organizations like CATO, which is it governs airlines, air travel internationally. You're dealing with the UN. You're obviously dealing with the countries that are involved, which at this point was obviously Ukraine. This is before the invasion of the Ukraine or of Ukraine, very close to the invasion, quite frankly. And you're dealing with the UK, Australia. And then what you need to do is you need to bring the Americans on board because they have the power, they have the muscle. And it was devastating to be with the families. It was devastating to see what we were not able to collect off that site. It's devastating to sit across from the IRGC and they're telling you that they're going to compensate you by weight of the victims.
Wow.
It's devastating when your own country doesn't jump up right away, unless if there's a mic there. There was a lot of performative politics that happened. There was such a dragging of the heels. But I will say, at that point, we had Francois Champagne as our minister. He was excellent. I could tell that he had reached a glass ceiling. And this is when most Canadians that are in my role know that you're going to be in trouble. And for us, the outcome of that was that Trudeau shifted him out of that portfolio. I think that I can't understand that. And it left us really behind the eight ball. And at that point, Iran saw that move as an opportunity to use their actors who were within Canada, who shouldn't even be here, but are within Canada, to not only threaten us, but to execute on those threats. I myself received them. One of our loudest voices, who happened to be a university professor Canada. I'm not going to name him because he's now very private. He was living in Toronto at the time, and a car attempted to drive through his house. I've had lots of conversations with RCMP, Toronto Police Department. At one point, there was no room for any other clients because it was just all so encompassing. Everything from trying to get compensation internationally to at least at the minimum being recognized that this was active terrorism. Canadians think that governments go, yes, that's an act of terrorism, bang, let's do it. Push all the levers. But it doesn't work that way. And I would say that it was excellent training, and it has stayed with me my entire since I left working with them. There isn't probably a week that goes by where I don't think about those photos I've seen, or what they did to the crash site, which was basically demoed it right away. The IRGC did awful things like take pictures after they had put the remains of the victims in these glass coffins. They had burned all their passports and then wrote martyr in ink on these glass coffins, and Iranian, not Canadian, Iranian, not British, or whatever it was. And they sent them out. And then they descended upon the victims' families on social media. They told me that I would die. It was a terrible situation. And I don't think any of us felt supported or protected by our government. In fact, it was external governments where we got probably the most empathy and greatest level of commitment. But at the end of the day, you still need your government to be there with you, because this is where you're taking the action, right? Or where those threats are being delivered or acted upon. So it's really, for me, the beginning of the evolution in my career of going from pundit and media commentary and general sort of communications, which I find absolutely devastatingly boring. Like, you're never going to see me like run a PR campaign for gym equipment. It's never, I'll go nutso. I feel like I need to contribute to the best of, to bringing the best of the world. I also feel I see the injustices, and I've wanted to use my powers for good. And so with that file really sets off to where I am today. And where I am today is I work with governments in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Lesser so with the US right now, because it's a bit of a strange time. And prior to that, I was working Canada-US relations in DC, going back and forth, predominantly, though, on the ground. And unfortunately, a large part of my job turned out to be teaching Canadian companies how to move their companies to very pro-business states like Colorado, which is one of the fastest growing states in the country. And it was very sad to see how the government couldn't bring certain important STEM-based companies online. And there's a few that I think about that now the U.S. military owns, and I know my former clients are extremely happy, but they had to leave their country to get to see the fruition, or to complete their process. And so I'm very happy now to be working with different governments and working on initiatives in countries that need social change, and then working on initiatives that need economic support or investment in other countries. So I work this very nice blend. I also still do advisement for corporate and political leaderships. We've had an issue particularly in the UK recently where I've been asked to provide some advice there. But I think what I want younger politically inclined Canadians to understand, there is a job after the Hill, and there is exciting work to be had, whether you take that to CSIS or you take it to a diplomacy, or you go and work for an international based company that specializes in geopolitics and communications, which is where I'm at. So there's lots of exciting opportunities, and Canada just isn't exciting. It's the issue, Spencer, that I was speaking on as a pundit in 2011, 2012, 2013 are the same issues that everybody's talking about still in Canada, except now there seems to be a bigger media buy-in to supporting those things that I was talking about. I was speaking to somebody from Japan the other day, and they said, gosh, Canada's so monotonous. And I was like, yes, it is. It never completes its swing. So, pat on the head, we're really nice, but we never do anything. We're not extraordinary. And I think it's also, if you don't take risks, there's no conflict, right? There's no challenge. So everyone's avoiding the conflict and the challenge, but you don't get the benefit of the risk. And nobody's willing to really talk about the issues that are happening in Canada that have led us to become, estranged from our allies. And for some allies, they laugh. They just shake their head and walk away. But I'd say estranged is probably the best term right now. And I don't know if 4 years of a conservative government or a change in government, because I don't want to be an oracle, but it looks like it's going to be a conservative government.
It's looking
I
that
don't
way.
know I don't know if 4 years of Pierre Poilievre is, I think it will make a big difference. But there are things that Pierre cannot do. And one thing I've said to their team is, I'm curious, how are you preparing Canadians to reduce the expectations? Because what you're having to do is turn a ship around that's been going in the wrong direction. It's like pulling the Titanic around. It's enormous challenge. You've got to take the bureaucracy with you. You've really got to put the pedal to the metal. But even with that, it's taken 10 years to get here. It's going to take maybe that to get out of it. And then you've got provinces that are addicted to the incompetence and the negligence. Some of them are benefiting from that. Others, as we've seen in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, are not benefiting from it. So the country is about to get interesting. Do I think it's interesting now? No, I don't find Canada interesting whatsoever. So I'm sorry, I'm Canadian, but it's too bad because there's so many incredible entrepreneurs, innovators, exciting people, interesting people that should be running for office. Great geopolitical minds, great scholars, great educators, like you name it. I see them all the time, but they have just decided to check out because this is not the environment that they can succeed, whether it's business or politics.
So one thing you said, you talked about how the IRGC treated the victims and then the families. And I think that gets at a deeper problem with Canada's. It seems, I guess it's almost like there's a naivete, not just to the government itself, but the country itself, and an inability to kind of understand evil. I've noticed that a lot with the way the government has spoken about Israel and Hamas, right? They can't conceive of the fact that yes, Hamas is acting in bad faith all the time. They're purposely trying to get people killed so they can say, "Oh, look what you're doing." We can't have a ceasefire, and so same thing with military spending. Trudeau goes out there and says, "Oh yeah, the rules-based international order is very important." Well, then you need to build up the military, right? There's no connection between the words and then the actions. So I'd be interested to see, where do you kind of think that mindset comes from, and how do you think we could start to address it as a country?
I'm not so sure we were the biggest sharpshooters on the political stage anyway. I don't think we've been a place where politics is like the US, and kind of thank God for that, right? We've been a serious place. We've been a serious country. The 1970s, the 80s are some of our best work ever. We've made huge differences to people's lives. We've saved lives. Canadians, though, there's no reason for them to buy in because they're very happy with this. And then until they're not happy. And then it's really just a change, which kind of is a twist, or, well, up until Trudeau, it was just pretty much more the same. Canada just does this. There's no extreme policies. Like, we've needed tax reform in Canada for 25 years. So much has changed. This is actually a really great policy topic to illuminate as an example. There 64% of women that own SMEs are entrepreneurs. And the reason why they find that lifestyle convenient to where they are raising families, the tax system is all over the place for them. Working families could enjoy so many more benefits. I find income tax predatory. It's regressive, not progressive. It is so difficult to start a business in Canada. It's true what they say. My father always said this: don't get too big. Canada doesn't like the competition. Mm-hmm. Where if you go to the States, it's like they give you rocket fuel to jump off. I mean, I can't tell you how many state senators will come to me and go, "What Canadian companies do you have in research tech or whatever?" And those are the states where my clients went. Their tax reform should be the top of discussion. There's no greater thief than the government of Canada. And is no accountability to how they spend. And quite frankly, they in the Constitution, they're supposed to be a ton of votes on a lot of the things that Justin Trudeau has done, but he's just bypassed Parliament completely, raised taxes. And the way that they've gotten away with doing some of it is the user fees and then the trickle down effect to the provinces and that trickle down effect to the municipalities. Tax reform should be on the lips of every Canadian. But Canadians have had Stockholm syndrome for over a decade. They were much more boisterous and vocal in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Big issues were being discussed: free trade, acid rain treaties. I mean, this all sounds pretty antiquated now, but they were the forefathers. Those policies are the forefathers to some of the issues around climate change today, right? And how globalization has affected Canadians, and probably not in such a great way. If Canadians were particularly peeved or concerned, I wonder why they're not asking their governments about climate change policies. So, for example, I've seen, as you have, $90 billion basically be lit on fire by shysters, grifters, friends and families from Trudeau's circle, all receiving this green money. Well, wait a second. Part of the climate change that you're exclaiming at the top of the mountain that we're all going to die. Well, I can tell you what's already happening. We have forest fires. The big quake is going to come. There's going to be a tsunami. Only 10% of BC schools have any sort of tsunami earthquake station. Only a small amount of that have been retrofitted. None of our hospitals and institutions, buildings have been retrofitted. There are no life vests in the schools. There's no life vests in community centers. But we sure have a lot of money going to other things that really won't make a difference. At this point, we are having to move with the change, right? I'm sitting in Vancouver today and it's 37 degrees with humidity. And that humidity has stayed with us since the heat dome, and it will forever change how summers are in Vancouver. And it's awful to a Vancouverite who, when I come home, expect a breeze. But I look around, all the things that were promised, which were these safety or, emergency preparedness, hasn't been backed up, and they're directly correlating that to climate change. Well, if that's the case, where is this? Canadians aren't. I don't even know if Canadians are sitting in their car listening to their favorite talk radio going, actually, that's not right. That's not true. Why haven't you done this? And I'll tell you something, Spencer. Even the most disenfranchised American, as we would call it, racialized community, low income, poverty line, in a Rust Belt state, for example, I think of states like Kentucky. If you walk up to one of those trailer parks or one of those homes and ask them when the next local election is, the next national election is, they will know. They will already know who they're voting for. They're riled about something. They may be wildly incorrect in what they think, wildly wrong, but they are passionate and they're going to go vote. We'll get to the wildly incorrect issue, but I'm just happy they're motivated to vote. That is something that unifies most Americans. And the idea of exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, and how voting and the process, and I know it's super messy in the States, but the reward is so big, right? I wish Canadians would take just a little bit of that into their water and start asking some of the big questions. I'd rather you be wildly incorrect, but in on the conversation, and we can get to correcting it, versus just, yeah, I'm okay with things. It's going to be okay. When I was doing media, and I know we're kind of going off topic here, but before election, we do streeters. I'm sure you're very familiar with those. And we would do them in Vancouver, and I would have to respond to them. And this was with the local outlet I was employed by at the time. And only one out of what was it, 30 people knew there was a federal election the following day or a provincial. We stopped doing them because it was just a complete waste of time. Vancouver was always known in the national bureaus as the place that you're not going to get that B-roll. You're just not going to get that streeter footage. And you hang on to that one who might know a little bit. But and if they knew there was an election, they couldn't name anybody in it. That kind of tells you, I think BC drags the country down on that, but it does tell you what I think has become not just a worrying trend, but a worrying reality. Voter turnout. They're so interested in Trudeau versus Pierre or whatever. There's bigger issues to be had here. There's tax reform. There's immigration reform. Those green funds need to be burned to the ground. We need to protect our children and our communities from natural disasters. They are coming hot and heavy. Governments are not preparing temporary housing or temporary health access to healthcare. Immigrants are getting healthcare on demand. Canadians are waiting and dying as they're waiting. There's a variety of issues, and that's just what's happening within Canada. We're not even discussing at this point all the mistakes and bad behavior of Canada on the world stage.
I feel like a big part of it is, a lot of Canadians, especially the government, when they're trying to play politics, but a lot of people have chosen to build our identity around not being Americans, which the problem with that is, of course, it's the most dynamic country in the world, most, strongest economy, strongest military, and probably a society that's 90% the same as we are, right? I mean, one thing my wife made a really interesting point. She said, if you're a Canadian, have you ever watched an American TV show and felt like you're watching a foreign film or a foreign TV show, right? Look at all the TV we watch. It's almost all American, and nobody thinks, oh, that's a totally separate culture from Canada.
No.
So it's almost in the absence of any kind of national identity, we've chosen to just not be like the most successful country in the world economically and militarily. And so that feeds into what you're talking about, the idea of, good enough is fine. We don't need to be the best. We don't need to, excel in anywhere.
You know what that is? That's a squatter mentality. There's not one country I visited, and it could even be the UK, that doesn't want the luxury and the privilege that Canada has of being geographically blessed. It's like being born into a wealthy family. It is the roll of the dice, right? Only a squatter next door to the most powerful country and the richest country in the world would ever have the privilege. I mean, we talk about white privilege. We talk about guy privilege. We talk about Canadian privilege is real. We don't have, okay, I don't want to be American, so I don't want to invest in military, and I don't want to be like all aggressive. The reason you don't have to do any of that, and the reason you get away with not doing any of it, because we have a collective security agreement, you idiot. Sorry, Spencer, this fuels me up. The reason we don't have illegal immigrants pouring into our country is because of the United States. They are they're a weatherproof wall. Now, because this country has not learned the lessons that COVID highlighted for us. Number one, fixing the supply chain, making sure that we are manufacturing products so we can take care of ourselves. So we're not squatters, because we are complete squatters. We're squatters, not just with the US, we're squatters on the world stage. If there was a horrendous event, and I'm not going to put it out there, but God forbid something horrendous happened, and the global supply shut down, Canadians would get sick very fast, thirsty and hungry very fast, and there would be no security here. And it's not just what we think about military security. We have no domestic security. We don't have a pharmaceutical manufacturing production anymore. That was intentional by the Trudeau government, I believe. Pushed them out. Yet we want all the benefits of having that industry or sector in Canada. So good pricing, all of that sort of stuff. We have anything that's been homemade has been long gone to the United States or elsewhere in the world, but predominantly the United States. Any scientific or STEM work, like I think about the Canadian company that invented a clean magnesium. We have magnesium production in North America, or the Western world, has ceased to exist since the 1950s because it's so highly toxic. It will kill you. But China, of course, continued to produce it. And some great people coming out of Western Canada said, hey, let's test run this. Did it for 3, 4, 5 years. Now, they tried to get the Canadian government involved. This would have been an incredible advancement for us on aerospace, defense, cars, a lot of different things. It was just completely avoided and ignored. And those founders went into a severe and heavy debt, waiting around to be realized in the Canadian market. So now the US military has it. So that's a good example. We've seen that also with different drugs, diabetes, Alzheimer's, research discovered, produced here, then goes off to the United States. I'm gravely concerned. I want Canadians every day to say, if something horrendous and horrific and extraordinary happened today, could we take care of ourselves? If the US is attacked, could we take care of ourselves? If we have a 9-point whatever earthquake and, certain resources go offline, can we take care of ourselves? With all the money that we gave out during COVID, not one red penny was properly invested into restoring Canadian manufacturing and small business in this country. And when we think about small business, we think of retail and we think of food, fast food predominantly. That's not necessarily what SMEs are in Canada. They are everything from, in the mining and energy production, all the way to STEM, all the way to female entrepreneurship in the tech side. It covers a vast, wide swath of important and what could be ever-changing products and services and research in this country. It's just not rewarded. And so I am really concerned about that domestic security. So I want Canadians to rethink security. And the only reason now we don't see these ginormous gaps is because of our trading partners and predominantly the United States, access to the United States. So in my mind, we're squatting. We're just squatting here. We're squatting on the world stage and we're not paying our rent. We're not paying our bills. And Canadians I just don't want to be like the Americans. Okay, well, you might have to be, because they're going to start ringing your doorbell pretty soon, asking for remittance of that payment. So, yeah.
One thing that that kind of makes me think of is you try to imagine the kind of the typical day for the prime minister or for someone high level cabinet official, and I think I don't understand how you can get the honor of leading an entire country. And then you get up in the morning and your first thought is, how's the military doing? What are the threats we face? How does a country for basically a decade have someone who gets up and apparently just, as you say, seems to have no concern about that? It's not just obviously Trudeau's a terrible prime minister, but the system obviously allows him to be a terrible prime minister,
Yeah.
right? More accountability can turn a terrible leader into a maybe below average one, right? What is it about just the mindset in the country or the system itself that makes it possible for someone to be so careless about the security of the country?
I think careless is a great word. There's got to be a neuroses there. I don't, this is way above my pay grade. I'm not a psychologist, but you have to be an incredible narcissist to feel comfortable walking into a room knowing that this is the state of your country. I was speaking to a very good friend of mine who's a former deputy minister. He actually was one of my first bosses, and you can blame him for me getting into media because he really pushed that. And it was when I met him when I was working with the Gordon Campbell government in BC. And, we were talking about political shame. What separates us from politicians like Trudeau? And they're growing in numbers. They really are. I think about Patrick Brown's scandal. I think about all the scandals of Trudeau. I mean, there you are in blackface. There you are talking out of both sides of your mouth on the world stage. There you are coming up to a group of leaders and they all turn their backs and they go separate ways and you have no shame in your game. I can tell you right now, I come from a family, I come from a world where I don't think I could show my face. I would be absolutely horrified. I would have stepped down. My parents or my mother, because my father's deceased, my mother probably wouldn't have talked to me for a few weeks. How could you do this?
Mm-hmm.
I feel such responsibility to my country, um, that I don't share that mindset. And, I've known Mr. Trudeau since I was a child. Not well at
Mhm.
all, but there was always moments where there was so much drama and over tiny little things. So I'm not quite surprised, but I am very shocked that there hasn't been an evolution of the sock guy, that, he's put more effort into a Vogue magazine cover shoot than he's put into doing. Um, I first of all, I'm just going to admit I would definitely be a one-term prime minister, because they will have, like, the left will have definitely decided, to burn down my house and kick me
Mhm.
out. So I know I've
Mhm.
got to quickly get a bunch of stuff done. But my hit list is exactly where I've started with you. Knowing that my country is the biggest enemy to my Canadians' economic, which is a socioeconomic issue, economic fortunes, would keep me up at night. Knowing that I can't pay my bills, or it's not that I refuse to pay my bills to the international community, that would keep me up at night. I come from a world where you should be ashamed of those things. There has to be pride. Um, I also would wake up knowing that my country cannot identify what makes them Canadian. And that comes from a lack of sort of beacons, what to look to. There is no pride because there's nothing to look to anymore. It's all been broken down. And we have been purposely divided and conquered. So now white people are scared to say anything. Black people are fighting with the Palestinian groups. I mean, everybody is supposed to have their own little island and tell everyone else to get off of it. We're so much better when we're all together. I think we need to see ourselves as just Canadians, identify elsewhere how
Definitely.
you want, but we have to go forward unified, because this country is on her knees. She's not well, and she's not well socially. She's not well economically. And the next decade or two are going to be the most challenging geopolitically. I mean, I wonder if, as a prime minister, Spencer, if he wakes up thinking, if there's a full-out war in the Middle East, and let's face it, Saudi Arabia scrambled 2 jets the other day to push Lebanon.
Mhm.
They have never been demonstrative of an outright support of Israel, which really was what the premise to all of this was. They were going to sign an agreement. I'll tell you, Saudi Arabia has no tolerance for the garbage that's happening in the Middle East, and they really see themselves as the um, the protectors of the Middle East, the pillars of the Middle East. And
I've
they
been
are
kind
in
of
the
pleasantly surprised by Saudi Arabia. I used to be very critical of them. Obviously, they're not
yeah.
a Western democracy, but they've been it's been interesting. They seem like they're trying to avoid the mistake that they've seen other countries make, and they're taking some things very seriously. So it's
Well, they
interesting.
haven't. They've recently released an excellent document. And I know many Canadians, actually every Canadian I've talked to has no idea this is going on in Saudi Arabia. Excuse me, but they have a document that is forward to 2030. It's a public document, and the work that went into it by people that work in the same business as me is extraordinary. The language is cued. It's there's a lot of different meanings in how they put their forward statement out there. King Solomon of Saudi Arabia puts the forward and the introduction in, and I think it's one of the most fundamental social swings of Saudi Arabia. Colleagues that came before me were instrumental in having women drive, also opening up visas for foreign workers and visitors, which is something that never happened before. And they talk a lot about Islam and how they're the protectors of these mosques, right? But they talk about Islam in a way that they want to see Islam, and they want the world to see Islam. And without denouncing Islamic terrorism, which they're horrified and embarrassed by, they then tell you all the things that they believe Islam really is. And I was very drawn to the document, to the work associated around it. I'm very impressed by Saudi Arabia. I'm not critical of them either. And then when you look at the Emirates as well and how collaborative they all are, it's such a futuristic world in those parts of the Middle East. And they believe that, you know, rising tides floats all boats, and that the issue of Gaza can only be settled by evening it out and supporting Israel. And that is a fundamental swing. The other day, I was supposed to travel to the Middle East, and the other day, well, it wasn't the other day now, it was maybe a couple of weeks ago. For the first time ever, Saudi Arabia closed its airspace because of the Houthis and the attacks. And then a US base was bombed. 2 servicemen were killed, which is so terrible. But Canadians don't really understand. They see these horrible pictures of Gaza, but there's all these other plays or military campaigns happening out there. I will also say to my country's foreign affairs minister, if Gaza is so horrific, which it is, it's bloody horrific. Where's Hamas? Where's all that money that we gave Palestine? Where's all the money that the international community has given them? You know where Hamas is? They're hiding in a cave like a bunch of little asses. And their job isn't to govern or to make sure women and children don't have these horrible scabs and skin diseases and are starving and living on garbage piles. Their number one goal is to kill every Jew and to disrupt world order. It has got nothing to do with the people. And the people voted 96% to have them as the government. Now, I understand there's intimidation and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you haven't been to the Middle East, you don't know corruption. Or political. I refuse to let Hamas off the hook, because if my Canadian media are going to speak about Hamas like they're not a terrorist organization and promote their press releases and propaganda as statements, then I'm going to hold them accountable to the same standard. Then you're a government, then you're legitimate. So your people are dying. Where are you?
Yeah,
Exactly.
I wrote something a while back,
I know. I
I
read
don't know. Yeah, I don't know how we could fight World War II with this kind of mindset. It would be the second Germany started to lose, it would be, oh, the poor German civilians, oh, were bombing their cities. It's so terrible. They're innocent. Oh, they can't win now. So what are we doing? Why are we still bombing them? We should do. But back then, people were like, no, look, once a country's decided they're going to go on some genocidal killing spree, and they voted for it in Germany as well. You
Yep.
have to go in, you have to remove that government, you have to defeat them entirely. The people have to see, look, this is how it ends for you. It ends very terribly. There's no negotiated peace or holding on to some of your territory. You're going to lose it all. And then you'll get a
Yep.
new government, and we'll see if that government can be reasonable. But
Well, the media are also counting on the fact that Canadians have no working understanding of Palestine. If anyone's been to Gaza Strip and there's some African countries like this as well, I've seen absolute horror where civilians looking to impress Hamas, or in other places, the Houthis or whomever, have killed another person and chopped the head off and run down the street, those sorts of things. I mean, I've seen horrible things in China. I've seen horrible things, obviously, in Iran. I've seen, I think Canadians should really look back to even 3 years ago of what Palestinians were up to. It was Palestinian terror on Palestinian terror. And Hamas was just a roving gang with the authority of a government. And they were pulling children out of school. They were breaking those UNRWA schools down for military training camps for children as young as 4 or 5. There's a lot of footage. And not from Fox News or these sources that people that maybe are tuning in to this that won't watch Fox News or for whatever reason, whatever. But these, like the BBC International, still has a very reputable journalism program. And they have done a lot of that work, CNN International as well. There's been a lot of content that supports what was really happening beforehand. And as Netanyahu said about 10 days ago now, this is their World War II. And they have been preparing to have Iranian retaliation. But unfortunately, what the Canadian news covers is how are Palestinians and Iranians and others preparing for Israel's attack. Well, wait a second. It's going to be an Iranian retaliation, right? I don't understand the twisted minds of Canadian broadcasters sometimes. They're rewriting stories, and it contributes to this laissez-fairness that Canadians have, or where they think they understand something and they have absolutely no understanding. The best example is how they talk about Americans. They think everyone's running around with a gun and they're all screaming at each other, and that healthcare is $20,000 for a doctor's visit. It's absolute not true, total garbage, right? Propaganda in this country is dangerous. And I don't know if it's meant to make sure that you stay here and that you're too afraid to go elsewhere. And that trying to get you to understand that this is the best place, but it's really not the best country in the world. And it's not the most equal, and it's not the most democratic country in the world.
Do you think part of this is, something I've thought about a lot is, Canada's maybe not the only country, but one of the only countries that has not really had an existential threat experience, right? I mean, we became independent by, just kind of slowly, and Britain was like, okay, go ahead, you guys can take control of this. That's fine. It wasn't,
you're too big.
Yeah, we fought some wars, but never a war. The U.S. fought 2 wars, first to become independent, then to decide what kind of country it's going to be. Is it going to be a slave country or a free country?
Yes,
we've never really had that experience, and so. One thing I read a lot about, I'm obviously a big advocate for increased military spending. And I look at Poland. They're running big budget deficits to spend a lot on their military, because Poland, they're saying, look, we know what happens if you don't spend. They get invaded by, Nazi Germany, the USSR. They look what's happening in Ukraine. They're saying, well, we're not going to let that happen again. But it's easy if you're a Polish politician to say, why we need a military, that you don't really need to. It's not a hard sell in Poland to say, let's protect ourselves. Canadians, It seems to be, and I get this, I tweet about it, and from the left and the right, some people on the right too. And it's like, oh, who's going to attack us? Or the US will protect us, or, who's going to come to Canada? People don't seem to realize, yeah, we're actually not that far from Russia when you actually look at the north. But there seems to be this total attitude from people that, nothing bad's ever going to happen. It'll be fine. And it's just, how do we break through to people? It's obviously a very deeply embedded mindset with a lot of people. How do you think we can break through and kind of, shift people's thinking on that?
Unfortunately, the closest we came to an existential crisis was the FLQ. But that now looks like small potatoes compared to what we see every day. Canadians are very naive. I remember 9/11 because I was flying to New York to receive an award from, it was Princess Diana's anti-landmine device award. It was going to a BC company, and all hell had broken loose. I was married to somebody at that time who worked with the Chrétien Prime Minister, or the PMO, and my daughter ended up in Vancouver. I wasn't living in Vancouver at the time. My husband and I were separated, and but we chose that our baby traveled with us all the time. She's one of the best flyers ever to this very day. Nothing phases her, time difference, nothing. But somehow she ended up in Vancouver, and I remember getting this call because I was stateside. It was chaotic, and it was from the Prime Minister's office. Don't worry. We have your daughter. We can't tell you where we are. She is safe. And then I got calls from family. There's suspicious activity on the pipelines. There's suspicious activity around water supply. None of that really turned out to be true. These planes were lost because they were circling, and they had lost communication for some reason. I mean, it was terrifying for my parents, my family. It was terrifying for me because I knew my daughter was somewhere out there at that time. I didn't know where she was exactly, because obviously she was with the Prime Minister of Canada at the time. And so they didn't disclose that. And I remember how we all felt. We felt very naked. We felt very unprotected. The US was in complete chaos. The Pentagon attack hadn't happened yet, right? Do you remember it was all in staggered succession? And when the Pentagon went, I went, oh my God, we're not prepared for this. I'm not prepared. My Canadians are not prepared. Um, and because we're so far, we're 20, well, my daughter's 24. So yeah, 24 years away from that. And it's hard to believe that because for me, it feels like yesterday. We have a whole generation who cannot make the connection of what real fear running down your spine feels like. And it's easy to tell you to sort of push it away now because you knew exactly. Now we have a fulsome understanding of what the day was really about, that there wasn't going to be any other further attacks. But at the time, the staggering of the attacks, Canada doesn't quite know what to do. There was chaos. That can easily happen again. Don't the Americans like Israel are military leaders, but there's always a porousness to all of us. There's no absolute security, and with Islamic terrorism on the rise, there will be, do you remember after 9/11, it was Chechnya. It was a series of events that took place that really began these holy wars that turned into these genocides. And Canada, unfortunately, has not such a great history with those peacekeeping missions before 9/11 and after 9/11. But we need to start thinking about those years because politics is cyclical. Everything, as you know, Spencer, you've written about this, everything that will come back again. And we're starting to see the squeezing. And it's really being kicked off by 2 or 3 different actors, but the Islamic State as a whole has no, like someone like Saudi Arabia, try as they might, or Qatar or any of those, they do not have the ability to slow the roll of these psychopaths. They don't care if they die. They just want you dead too. And America is enemy number one. And Israel is synonymous with America. And that's why the Saudis supporting Israel is so dangerous to geopolitical security. But I'm very proud of Saudi Arabia. They've made huge leaps and bounds socially, democratically, geopolitically. They've had to get up and stand up. And I know people have been very critical of Saudi Arabia, but I was so impressed to know they had scrambled at least one jet. Because that scrambling one Saudi jet is like scrambling 10 US jets. But I want Canadians to think about the vulnerability of 9/11. When you think about domestic security, it's all the things that I mentioned. And we don't have a prime minister, and Canadians told us, I don't want a prime minister who has any intent of being serious. Mr. Harper has done a good job. My bank account feels good. I don't know what interest rates are. I don't know what it feels like to carry an enormous amount of debt. I'm super privileged and I'm a millennial. The millennials are largely to blame for where the country is right now. The Gen Zs blame them all the time. So you've got their Gen Z cousins who are highly conservative now, millennials who are very similar to boomers, and Gen Xers are relating to their Gen Zs, right? I'm actually in that weird spot where no one will claim me millennial or Gen X. So, but I just hang on to Gen X because I don't want to be associated with the millennials. But I think that there is a huge comeuppance, and millennials are the most miserable in the country. So it'll be interesting. Are they going to take the privilege of being deciding factors in how our country moves and performs? Are they going to take that seriously now? Are they finally grown up enough to actually make good decisions at the ballot box? And I think they are. I think they've seen the consequences of a party bus that was posing as a PMO. And they spent all our money partying. It's like, I might as well just brought Kanye West in as our prime minister or some rapper dude. I mean, it's been the most humiliating experience for me as well. And I think, and I hate to say this, it's been such an economic impact. I don't just mean the economy, but the knock-on effects that small business owners or people in my business have felt. I talked to the head of one of Canada's largest companies exactly a year ago this week. And he had said to me at that point, pens down, we're not doing any hiring. It's too regulatory chaos, don't know what's going on. We're just trying to keep ourselves out of his sight line because he may come after us next. And sure enough, he did. And they couldn't put pens down and just sort of wait. So, but there's been huge consequences to the failure. We're a failed state right now. You know, I've said some mean things about my country today, but and the reason I care so much, or the reason I'm saying all of this, is because I care so much about this country. But I've had to step back because for my own mental health, because it's like, you know, I said to a cousin of mine who works in the UK for now a former prime minister. And I said, I felt like I wasn't sure if I was the patient or the visitor coming back to Canada. I hadn't been gone that long too. So when I first came back from the States, there was this general malaise. I felt it almost right away coming out of YVR. And I was so excited to be home. I was like, I'm going to go and do all the things that you do in Vancouver. But once the shininess rubs off and you've pretty much seen everything in a couple of days, you realize there's not much to Vancouver. She's got all the usefulness of a Christmas ornament in July. She's not an economic innovator. She's been, you know, any sort of entrepreneurial spirit has been pushed to the corners or shoved down. There's culture wars happening in British Columbia that I think are dangerous, but have been fueled by Trudeau and David Eby and the NDP, and what I would consider hard right, or I don't know if I call them hard right even, because I think when they say they're quote unquote conservative, I think they're posing because they don't know where else they belong, but they're definitely on the hate scale. There is anti-Semitism in a way that I have never seen in Vancouver. And I've seen graffiti that made my stomach turn. So there's tolerance for the intolerant, but there's no tolerance or support for the economic drivers of the province that I'm in right now. So there's all these different things going on. But, you know, I wanted to really also talk about the economic impacts of being a national or a global squatter and wimpy. And I would suggest that, you know, Trudeau moves like a weather vane. So that means there's no planning, there's no succession. So there's no investment document that you've seen. Even Saudi Arabia, they've always put one out. UK puts one out. Canada hasn't put one out in 10 years. There's no emergency preparedness. So our allies don't even know what we have stockpiled. So if something happens to us, they don't know how to help us. And then that is intrinsically tied to the lack of military spending, and actually the little game that Trudeau played not that long ago with removing 150 million in operational and on the operational and maintenance budget. So, and people say, oh, it's just operational maintenance. It is not what you think it is. It's not just, you know, we're not going to buy screwdrivers. The moving that money around was an international siren.
Well, they just reported that 48% of our equipment is not usable right now. I mean, what little we have, half of it we can't even use. So.
Well, our allies already have known for a long time we're struggling to even put out, you know, there's certain military campaigns that are happening that Canadians aren't even aware of. And we were asked to put out 2 battalions. And so that's about 2,000 troops. We are struggling, painfully struggling, trying to put that together. The operational maintenance budget also includes training. And the Canadian Armed Forces have spent a lot of money advertising recruitment campaigns. They are desperately in need of a new breed of military, people that want to join the military, but without the proper ways of training them, which it does include sit-down tutorial, but also includes using equipment, learning how to use equipment. And the equipment that they have if it's not broken, is not up to today's standards. So when you take 150 million out, we already had a junk pile of products like toys that don't work and replacement parts that don't fit because the product or the vehicle or whatever it is too old. I will say this doesn't include helmets, weapon like rifles, anything like that. But if we don't train people how to use their helmet, their rifle, take care of themselves, there is no new breed of military. So it is people in the international community that are military or the US Congress who have been chasing us like a dog in the night about this 2%, they were fully aware of it. The other side to this is, and remember, we have our mutual security agreement, right? So I don't know what position that leaves us in with the United States. I think the United States goes, look, they can't even put 2 battalions together. Just so you know, Italy, France, France is probably not a good example. Estonia, Spain, Italy, they can put out 4 times in a snap of the fingers, 4 times 2 battalions. And there are economic consequences. You may think you can run from not meeting a 2% GDP, 2% of GDP, but the Americans and the international allies will find you, whether it's our NATO, NORAD partners or US or whatever, they will find you. And how they will find you is through the trade agreements. They will ding you all over the place. And that's what's going to happen. How does this affect softwood lumber and the tariffs, right? How does this affect our pricing on pharmaceuticals? How does this affect our pricing on other, whether we're importing or exporting? We have one of the most significant trade agreements with the UK that was fostered by Stephen Harper or completed by Stephen Harper. That will affect that relationship too. We have other agreements. We have the European agreement that will affect it as well. They'll find us. It's like trying to run from, your credit card company today. There is no way that they can't find you. And this will just cost Canadians more, but sadly, it will literally cost us more. It will cost us our personal and our domestic security. It robs us of any of our previous shiny moments of military or peacekeeping campaigns. It robs us of what was really quite a good reputation. We may not have been the biggest, but we were going to give, and show up, right? That is long gone now. And we are no longer called. So to give you an example of this, I was on a junket in New York last November. I believe Deal Book is in November. It's an event called Deal Book, and CNBC Squawk Box host. Oh my God, I have forgotten his name. Sorkin, Andrew Ross Sorkin. Thank you very much. Sorry, it's hot in here. He hosts Deal Book every year, and it's an incredible thing. Canadians should go. And one of the most important parts to this was the AI component. And military leaders were invited to attend. And I can't remember if it was a symposium I went to or if it was an offsite event. So much has happened, but I got to see video of where AI was going with the military. And ironically, Finland was put in charge from the US and the other allies to run the AI programs. And because there's so many ethical questions around use of AI in military and warfare, right, that are still being figured out. The Finland, Estonia, and Italy had partnered up to do this demonstration. There was not one Canadian or a military member from Canada there. There wasn't a politician. And yet there were so many members of like US Congress, huge tech, what I call the tech bros were all there. And then I got to see something absolutely extraordinary. I got to see AI grow back a limb, a partial limb that had been lost. And now this man, so right now, he AI, and he's a former soldier. AI is helping him walk, but they are testing AIs, a plant put in, or a chip put into his brain that gets him to regenerate a limb, and it's working. It's incredible.
Hmm.
But this network of little companies are talking about giving us military presentations on how to use AI for espionage, how to use AI to reduce casualties. Then we had the ethics conversation that was led by the UK, Australia. All the NATO buddies were there, but Canada wasn't. And I came home so very excited. I was actually going to write a piece on it. And then the main discussion of military and Canada's military started flooding into the, places where you work and other publications. And I stepped back and I looked at that commentary and I realized, how do I go from here to there with the reader? They haven't seen what I've seen. It's not going to get any hits. Nobody is going to care that I wrote this, because everybody's still talking about, I need a tank, I need a plane. And we're not even talking about buying new planes. We couldn't even get the F-35s right. That is just, it's so disgraceful. We have, for the last 25 years, brutalized our military in different ways, and military is so important to much, much more than just protecting our borders or involving ourselves in peacekeeping campaigns. And to see how far ahead even someone like Finland is. They have a special unit where they work with civilians who are 20, 21, 22, where they're programmed the AIs. And it was just, I was flabbergasted, absolutely flabbergasted and excited. And I thought, okay, this is scary and exciting. Where is Canada? I was sort of like, well, I want to talk to somebody from Canada. Tell me how we're doing this. And then I thought, we don't have the capabilities to even plug in a brand new plane that's 2024. How are we going to participate in incorporating AI on any level across our armed forces? Because our infrastructure is 1970. And the way that we manage our military is 1970. The way we think about it is 1970. And politicians in Canada are so fearful of sounding American that they refuse to, they've jumped out of the responsibility of articulating this or framing this as I'm framing it today. You have the privilege of living next to the United States. It's a privilege. It's not a right. It's a privilege. It's luck of the birth draw, right? The lottery. It does not mean that you don't have to invest in military. It doesn't mean you don't have to invest in your own manufacturing, whether it's military manufacturing or any other parts of the manufacturing. That is domestic security 101. Both conservative and liberal and forget about the NDP, but conservative and liberal MPs are equally at fault for not picking up the mantle and running down the course and saying, I need to express to all of you Canadians what military investment in this country really looks like and why we need to do it.
Yeah, one thing that concerns me, at least from what I see online, is this. It's kind of this isolationist, almost anti-Western sentiment growing on the left. It's been there for quite a while on the left, but increasingly on the right now, I noticed too. It's this kind of reflexive, I'll tweet something about Ukraine and then the comments from conservatives often, not MPs, because the MPs are very supportive, but a lot of conservative supporters, it's basically just regurgitated propaganda from Russia in many cases. And then with the left, the same thing. You say something about Israel, and then it's just left wingers repeating Iranian propaganda, right? And then, of course, Justin Trudeau and China's propaganda. And so it seems like we've been identified as a weak link by many of the hostile nations of the world, and they can test out propaganda on us and manipulate us. And so it's like there used to be kind of a center left, center right coalition on defense issues in the Western world, right? Whatever domestic issues we had, there was kind of an agreement on, yes, we need a decent military. Yes, we have the same enemies outside our country. Foreign policy kind of ends at the water's edge used to be the idea. But now it seems like it's just that's gone now. So how do you think we could start rebuilding that and explaining to people why, isolationism, sure, it sounds nice. I'm sure I've indulged in it in some of my writing in the past, but that's not the world we live in. We can't just cut ourselves off and say, oh well, it's Europe's problem, or it's Taiwan's problem, or it's Israel's problem, and these problems come here very quickly. So how would you get through to people on the importance of that?
Well, I really blame legacy media. I'm going to make sure I make that distinction. When I came home, and I know this is going to sound tiresome because I'm talking about coming home from the US, but I will say coming home from the UK, coming home from the Middle East, it's been the same experience. Doesn't matter where I've come from. What matters is that I've been pulled out and then I've been dropped back in. And it feels very performative and manipulated. We talk about state media in Iran and other places, and I've seen my fair share of state media. And I've seen what it can become. And Canada's not that far away, because it has to serve the master now. It's funding it. So how is it not state media? But when I came home, I was very surprised to see the lack of stories that really matter being told, whether it's Global BC, like their nightly news, which used to be boom, 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 like incredible coverage, or it's the National, which has the lowest viewership it's ever had. I think they had 7,000 people watch them the other night, something crazy like that. I mean, 17,000 people watched them the other night.
Brutal.
It's the only country as well that I circulate in that doesn't stream their newscasts on YouTube. So Sky, BBC, Al Jazeera. I watch everything, Spencer, because I want to know what everybody's thinking. And then I have a selection of what I call non-traditional media. Young guys like you coming up on the streets of the UK or whatever, telling me what they are seeing, because I want to know absolutely everything. I want to be offended. I want to be excited. I want to be passionate. I want to be pissed off. I want it all, right? NBC also does an incredible, and CNN as well. They all stream their news. CTV, CBC, Global, don't stream it. They'll upload their news, because I was trying to get some Canadian news. They'll upload their news a day later, but it's about a dog that got stuck in a well. Or it's Pride Week. Well, I'm excited for Pride. Sure. Okay, great. But what else is going on? Have you guys noticed that inflation is almost dead in the United States? And suddenly they have this huge issue where if they cut the interest rate, it's going to go off like rockets. Or if they don't, it's like, this matters to us.
It's like very small town news, but for a country of 41
yeah,
million people or
I think
so,
this
right?
might be the high school journalism department. I'm pretty sure of it, because I was part of that. It felt very much like that. It also felt, there's a very immature, butter wouldn't melt type attitude. I think it's also very performative. I mean, one of the reasons I don't do punditry in Canada anymore, and I know there's certain people that are like, oh, she was fired. No, I was not fired. One of the reasons I don't do punditry anymore is that at least two of the outlets have this rule. You're not to debate crosstalk. So you can't really look at each other. Well, you are to talk to the host, and the host will then ask the question. Well, I've done American punditry, which, by the way, all day long, it's a joy. It's exciting. And I know people bash CNN or bash Fox, but those are still miles apart. Like CNBC for me is the crown jewel. It's politics, it's geopolitics, it's tech, it's government, it's all these things rolling together that make life, for me at least, very exciting. And I get really inspired when I watch them. But anyway, getting back to Canadian media, Canadian media is, I think, the foremost cause of Canadians' ignorance. Ignorance can be a choice, or it can be you're ignorant to how you got the ignorance, right? But if while I'm hearing is Pride Parade, more treaty negotiations, it's very much like a carousel. One issue just replaces another. Oh, anti-oil protesters. Oh, they're mad about Site C. Or I mean, it's the same stuff. And I'm not being anti-Pride, and I'm definitely not being anti-First Nations. But the way those stories are told is so uninteresting to me. Um, there is so much coming out of both of those communities that have nothing to do with Pride Week that are exciting to me, and that
And
full of young
yeah,
people.
sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt, but I'm obviously a supporter of the LGBT community as well. And not a fan of the super socially conservative stuff. But what I notice with the media coverage is there's no connection of issues, right? So for example, Trudeau goes to a pride parade, and then they'll be very weak on these super anti-Semitic protests. So
yes,
what do the pro-Palestinian groups think about gay people? How do gay people get treated in the Middle East? No connection of these things, right? I mean,
no,
what's the guy's name? I think, is it Fred Hahn? Fred Hahn,
yeah,
the
oh yeah,
union
CP
fellow there.
president,
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure he's a member of the LGBT community, and he's like one of the most rabid anti. I would say he's anti-Semitic, to be honest.
he's a
But
hate-filled
yeah,
anti-Semite.
and it's
Yeah,
like, why would he target the one country in the Middle East where he he'd be free there? He could live his life however he wanted. Instead, he's advocating for people who would possibly just kill him or jail him. I mean, there's no rights for
yeah,
the gay community in most of the Middle East, but you never hear that in the media. There's never a connection
no,
of these issues, never a deeper discussion. And so I guess the challenge is those media companies. I mean, global seems like every single day you read, oh, this person's been laid off, this person's laid off, they canceled this newscast. So it seems like much of the media in Canada is already collapsing. Do you see them rebuilding themselves in a more credible way, or do you think that's just going to disappear entirely?
I have my money on one horse. So you're right, Global BC, who I was, I remember the Global BC has been part of my life since the first day I can remember. And I listened to CKNW. My father actually said, I introduced him to Paul Martin and then Stephen Harper. And he said to me, he loved Harper because of the Arctic thing. And he really liked Paul Martin too. But he said, I'll tell you, unless you get on CKNW, I don't want to meet any more prime ministers or premiers or whatever. If you get on the Bill Good show, I don't need anything more. Because it was such a big deal to be, it was called The Giant. CKNW was a news leader. I remember being a little girl and listening to our premier at the time and the union leader. Bang, bang, bang. Like, and I actually started, my mom said I started to cry because I was so like, are they going to fight, Dad? And he's like, no, this is great. Get her out of the room. We listened to Canucks games. It was, it's so intrinsically tied to the memories of my father and the goals that he had for me. And I spent my summer last year, and I don't want to say where because I want to make sure Mr. Good has his privacy, but Bill Good lives there. And I would run into him at the supermarket, and it was like this coming home because he taught me how to be tough. Get in there, Alise. I was on a show before I was well ever into Power and Politics or CTV's Power Play, and he was really instrumental. But to see, it's just like, I can't even listen to CKNW anymore. There was an interview the other day from somebody that was stepping into a friend of mine or a former colleague of mine, I guess I could say, Jill Bennett, great reporter who with Global BC now has their own show on CKNW. And this person was stepping in last week for her. His comments were so incredibly stupid. And I don't mean stupid like you're dumb. I mean, literally stupid. How does this person have a radio show? How are they even being allowed on the show? This person was talking about the housing crisis. We just build more and the prices will come down. That is absolutely the opposite of what every economist has said. He made remarks about military spending. He was talking about, do you just have to shove stuff out of the way to get to certain, I can't even get into it. And I probably we're going to have to edit way through this interview because I'm on a tangent now. But I do think there's hope. And I will tell you who the hope is. I started to see some changes over at City News. And in Vancouver, I can't remember what it is in Toronto, but in Vancouver, it's News 1130. And then, of course, they have their 24/7 channel. They have City News, which is basically, I would just call it Toronto.
Mhm.
And then they have City News West. Then, about a month or two ago, they introduced Rob Snow. 5 hour, if you're in Atlantic Canada, it's a 5 hour program. In the West, it's 4. He's on vacation right now. I'm dying because it's it's the best political show in Canada. Rob Snow, I've worked with him many times when he was at CFRA, as well with Evan Solomon, who I think was a lost resource when CBC got rid of him. And then the whole
That seemed
CTV
like
thing.
such a minor issue for them to boot him out
I,
for.
I think I think that's Rosie Barton, but
Hmm.
I'll leave my opinion to myself because I don't want to be sued. But so what's happened at City TV in the last few months is Rogers, its parent company, has gotten into some incredibly smart deals. Where Global has lost its main revenue stream, and I'm talking global, period, not global news, just global. They lost the suite of the Bravo shows, the HGTV or HGTV shows. They've lost that sort of Stack TV grouping of shows, which I always couldn't understand. If you're going to have the global app, why do you need Stack TV? But anyway, they've completely lost that. They're in barren ground now. They're going to just be doing what CBC essentially does, is just repeat American shows that are sort of popular. I don't know how this is going to work because NBC Universal has done a deal with Rogers. And I think most people in Canada that watch Real Housewives of whatever city or anything from Bravo have been complaining that they can't get the same access to Bravo or American shows through like Peacock because it's blocked to us. Well, that deal will arrive and land in the fall of 2024. So a few months from now, that's a huge deal for them that will generate a significant source of revenue. The buying of that app is not going to. So right now, if you're a Rogers customer, there's certain things you can't see, but if you're a TELUS customer, there's certain things you can see. Well, I've unplugged from my cable box, and Rogers is fully aware that if you're just paying for internet, they can't tell you what you can watch. So you will be able to download and pay for, like a Disney app or whatever, Peacock. Peacock is not just Bravo, because it's news, it's NBC Nightly News, it's a lot of interesting, different current affairs, political shows, sports events. It's going to knock the socks off of what remains of the CBC and Global. They're no longer going to be competitive. And I cheer on News at 1130, City TV, Rogers, all the way. I think the deal of the Shaw Rogers deal was a bad idea, but there is some good coming out of it. We can't go back in time. I'd love to unravel that, but I think it's good. And Rob Snow, I think he's the beginning of what we're going to see as new programming. Their numbers went through the roof once people started jumping on the Rob Snow bandwagon. I know people that were listening to NW for 25 years won't touch it now and only listen to Rob Snow and are really ticked off. He's on vacation right now, actually. I think as his show goes on, it'll get better and better. I think he's going to feel braver in speaking about third rail issues. He's in Ottawa, so he might not be that brave. I don't know. I think you can be, the further away you are, like my cousins on the East Coast and my family on the West Coast, we say it all, but the mushy middle of just, it's very polite, very Canadian. But I think he'll get into some third rail issues. He's sort of leaning that way, but I'm interested to see what else Rogers has planned for City News, and what kind of scope that is. And where does that leave CP24 and all these sort of, very Toronto centric groups? What's it going to look like for viewers in Ottawa and Toronto or even Winnipeg? I'm excited about this. I have this feeling this is going to get interesting pretty fast. If CKNW doesn't fire every single host that they have right now, they're never going to compete, because if they've got 2 or 3 more Rob Snows showing up, that's it for CKNW. You can't just listen out of loyalty. And you can tell they're struggling financially. Every 8 minutes, there's an advertisement. News 1130, I'll switch over. That's not the case. And it's sad to me because, they're celebrating the Global BC and CKNW are celebrating 80 years in Vancouver this past week. And I was listening to all the guys I used to listen to as a kid, and they were, a lot of off-color stuff happened, but it made you reminisce for a time that wasn't careful. And it was just sort of balls to the wall, let's go, let's talk. For when a time when a premier would debate a union leader, on the Jack Webster show. I mean, it's the golden time, and CKNW has just squandered its position in that market. They've squandered it. They're not serious. They're not smart. They're not interesting. And every host starting from 6 a.m. right to the 6 p.m. hour repeats the other host's show. And that's kind of what's happened to chorus across the spectrum. And then I guess when it reaches the Winnipeg, Ontario border, it goes into the global zone, and they've just squandered whatever lead they had, and I'm mad at them for that. They've broken the contract with me. Right. So anyway.
Good metaphor for Canada as a whole, squandering, all of our opportunities. I mean, you're talking about almost it's like being in the future when you're in, Saudi Arabia or, the Emirates. You look at Canada's per capita GDP, and I think we're about the same as Israel now, which is, when you think about it, Israel, almost no natural resources, tiny little strip of land surrounded by hostile countries. And the fact that on a per person basis, they're doing as well as we are. You mentioned shame. There should be an embarrassment in Canada that we have the issues we have, food bank usage, crumbling healthcare system. These are things that a country with our resources, this should not be a problem. The problem should be too many people coming here to access world-class healthcare, too many skyscrapers going up in our cities. It should be problems of massive wealth, but our problem, I don't know. It's kind of a chicken or the egg thing, though. Is this our politicians' fault, or is it the populace not demanding enough of politicians? A bit of both. Who do you think is most responsible for how we've ended up in this situation?
I think it was it's just sort of, it's unfortunate because it's a bit of a birth defect for Canadians, because we are so privileged, right? And we're told, don't be too successful, right? Don't be too loud, because the Americans are like that, and then the Brits are like this, and then, we're just told, just don't be. And then when you're a woman, it's even worse, because, at least as I was coming through politics, sit down, shut up, right? I'm glad Fox showed up on our TVs, because it taught us how to be a little boisterous, right? We got a little boisterous, and we got a little angry. And I like that. Like I would say to any of your viewers or listeners, I would say, look, watch as many things as you can on all the spectrums. Get upset, get passionate, get excited. Just get something to get that Canadian heartbeat up, because you're losing your country. It is failing. This is going to be a failed state. It doesn't mean you can't change from that, because we've known many failed states. The UK in the 70s, failed state, right? It might be going that way again after what I've seen, but it is.
It's all cyclical, as you sasaid. They're going to a difficult cycle, it looks like.
Well, we've got the 70s prime minister. Mm-hmm. We just have his son. It's no coincidence that actually he's doing worse than his own father on so many different indicators, right? Performance models. But I would say to Canadians, this is your time to stand up. And to the young people that it's all about the TikTok and Twitter or whatever, it's not. It's really not. It's about, how are you performing every day? You have a responsibility to yourself and to your neighbors, whether they agree or disagree with you, to get out, vote, but not just vote. I want to know that you know the name of the person you're voting for, you know what they support. I actually am willing to say, don't necessarily vote on your political partisanship, I mean, just because it's a conservative candidate doesn't mean I have to vote for it, right? If I know that in their personal life, their morality is questionable, right? If I know that they don't have I know that they'll probably be appointed, but they don't have the resume to be a finance minister or whatever, I might just stand back and not vote for them because I need serious contenders. This country is not just wobbling. She's on her knees. She's looking pretty bad, and other countries are laughing at her. And it's not because of a made up meme from Fox News that this is happening. This is from your liberal, progressive, schnazzy sock wearer, make you feel good because it's 2024, whatever. This guy has curated the demise of Canada. And I'd love to tell you he intentionally did it, but he's not that bright. And anyone that knows him knows he's not bright.
Like, he thinks he's doing a good job still. He thinks he's some sort of genius or...
Well, it's very much like the emperor has no clothes at the PMO, and for the kids that don't know that fable, is it a fable? I don't know. But for those who don't know that story, I highly recommend looking up because I don't think I've ever seen a bigger case of an emperor has no clothes on. People called Harper arrogant. People called Chrétien ruthless and arrogant. And at one point, they even called Mulroney arrogant. But that was a good bout of self-confidence compared to this,
Yeah, they were all smart enough to have earned a bit of arrogance as opposed to the unearned arrogance chops from Trudeau. Right?
Yeah. Well, like I said, Canada, if I had voted for Trudeau, I'd be incredibly embarrassed. And if I had voted for him 3 times, I would be horrified with myself. If I found out one of my children had done that, you can be a liberal, but you don't have to support incompetence. And if the party is telling you this is the best they can do, then you need to figure out how you're either going to work within the system to change it, or you need to get out and find a new party. I'm tired of Canadians making excuses for why they can't be better, why they can't be faster, why they can't be more passionate. Why are they putting up with anti-Semitism? Why is now there a tolerance? I'll never forget the day that I saw the first case of really a physical assault by an anti-Semite on an older Jewish man outside a synagogue in Vancouver. The top story on Global BC was the numbers around anti-Asian hate during COVID. Not once mentioned what had happened. And I thought, they've got a narrative. Here we go. And then because it hasn't been covered, I bet you there's another incident. And sure enough, there was one on the SkyTrain. And then I saw what had happened in Montreal. And before I knew it, it was like Mpox. It was everywhere, right? And to see my country and those elected to protect religious freedoms and not to repeat the horrors of the past. Spencer, I'm not exaggerating when I say that I've cried about this. I've been extremely disturbed. My soul is crushed because I grew up believing in institutions like the UN, religious freedoms, that Canada was the beacon. If we couldn't do big military power plays, we were going to be peacekeepers and the beacon of safety and civility and democracy. We are none of those things. We can't even take care of the families that are here right now, and we're importing a lot of that anti-Semitism. We're importing a lot of bad behavior, and we're not checking. We have 2 jihadis with Canadian, and Mark Miller, our immigration minister, doesn't know if he will get rid of the guy's citizenship. If that had happened in the UK under their homeland policy, which is not called that, but to give an Americanism to it so Canadians understand, that citizenship is immediately severed, and they are put on a plane, probably dropped from the plane. I haven't ever seen the landing on one of those, but they are definitely dropped off, and they are not to come back. And they report to the Five Eyes after that. US, they would be absolutely horrified. I mean, can you imagine if Biden was caught with 2 jihadis planning to blow up the country and had given them a Canadian citizenship, and they had been back and forth in ISIS videos?
And we didn't even find out about it ourselves, wasn't it? One of our allies had to tell us, right?
Well, France has been very
Mhm.
busy with Finland working on the AI technology of like RoboCops and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So I'm not surprised. They're quite, it looks very still waters over there, but
Mhm.
France is doing a lot of heavy lifting on the security file, like Australia is. Um, you know, Another thing I want to say about the Australia thing, because Canadians are fixated when they see Australia included on these White House statements or NATO statements. And it's always in partnership with Spain, which people made fun of for years, but they show up all the time now. I believe Finland's been involved in some of those statements too, definitely the Brits. Australia is not quite how people think they are. Canadians like, okay, so Australia would be the closest equivalent to Canada. And look, if we just do what Australia does, we'll be back in the game. Reality is, Australia is hanging by its fingernails in that group. They could be kicked out pretty soon too. They, their commentators, people like myself, are calling them a failed state. There are many issues happening in Australia, and they are very similar issues to what has made our lives a misery in Canada,
Well, they
or
have a real
make us
China
very.
interference problem as well, right?
Yeah, they did what we did. They sold politicians lined their pockets on the backs of Canadians, and there's a handful of politicians in this country, specifically coming out of British Columbia, that should have been incarcerated, should have had a trial, but there was no political will, and I don't know where RCMP was in all of this. I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not surprised that Canadians, especially younger Canadians, knowing some of these stories, have zero trust in the police, little trust in the media. And it's why someone like yourself, Spencer, is so important to the ecosystem now, to the fifth estate. Because whether young Canadians realize it or not, there needs to be a trusted source of journalism, because there can be. But, I was front and center in the Gordon Campbell years and the Christy Clark years of what went down on that side of the house. And what disturbs me, because I think people that know me in Vancouver best know me for being Gordon Campbell's like pundit spokesperson. That's really where I started off, or maybe Brad Walls, I don't know. But watching what happened and knowing the deceit and the criminality of it, after being a member of that party since I was 17, 16 years old, and working with two leaders, um, I just walked away. It was one of the reasons why CBC said, we don't know how you're going to fit into this punditry because you're no longer a BC Liberal. And I said, well, I'm still a federal conservative. And then I thought, you know what? I've had enough. This is just crazy town over here. And I don't want to represent Christy Clark because she's a snake. I'm not doing this, right?
Well, good thing their rebranding went so well there.
Yeah,
BC
United.
United, that's going
Yeah.
great for them. Yeah.
I can't. Well, the Kevin that I knew really well for a long time, I don't see him there. But what bothers me is John Rustad now. I've known John 24 years. I've worked with him. We've spent a significant amount of time with him, with each other. Actually, we've spent a significant day together, the day that Gordon Campbell resigned. And he often refers to that. But when I supported him and the BC Conservative Party, it was after a long hiatus. I very much wanted to watch what was happening. And now what I'm seeing is that they have brought in, and there's one most recently actually, that were members of that party until 2 minutes ago. They've gotten rid of other candidates. And what bugs me is that these guys coming in that were all part of the Christy Clark crew, most corrupt government that nobody knows about in British Columbia, has the government that has most greatly affected the social and economic outcomes of Canadians. They have broken British Columbians' backs. That government specifically broke the backs. They weren't conservatives. They were selfish, narcissistic players of a game that they created. And no other British Columbian, unless you were a Chinese developer or a developer in Vancouver, knew about it. And I literally watched somebody take a bag full of money outside of a casino. It was a politician. I knew I wasn't going to stay at that point, but to find out all those people are hanging out in John Rustad's backyard, I don't know why we just don't call it BC Liberal under Christy Clark 2.0 or Rustad Clark show or whatever. I've had enough. my support of the BC Conservatives is over now. And I was hoping that they would be brave enough to know that they could win with people that were only household names in certain places like Kelowna or, Prince George or whatever, without having to bring in the trash. And, this province will never get up and over the hurt and complete financial wipeout of its middle class if they don't take some sort of stance and say we need people that know that have no previous history to one of the worst economic crises that our province has ever had. Right? I don't think John Rustad and the BC Conservatives and his group of merry little men in short pants running around him really understand the significance of winning, like what it means to lead. And that's actually Canada's problem. How many great leaders do we really have from the provinces to the feds?
You think that might be part of what they're thinking, though, is that, they're probably going to win a bunch of seats they don't expect or didn't expect to win until recently. So they're trying to get a few people with some governing experience on the inside.
No, these people don't have governing experience. They are the people that were, they were the hangers on around Christy Clark, and they might have been staffers too. There were some of them that were doing Premier's office business and running private consultancy off the other side of their desk. And she knew all about it. The party rewarded it. Honestly, the whole thing's really stinky, and I'm really glad I'm not in that business of working with these guys. But I was very excited for the BC Conservatives, and I may be the only one vocalizing this, but I'm definitely not the only one thinking this. And the other day, there was a news story out of Kelowna, what they had done with the candidate there, and that was the final straw for me, because this was the person that they've decided to replace their really good local candidate with, like local lady. They tried to bribe her too to get her out of that seat, and good for her for saying no. But the person that's replacing her is just a Christy Clark person who has never been a real conservative. He moved up to Kelowna like a month or two ago, and now he has the seat. He held a BC Liberal membership or a BC United membership until what I heard was 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's just the same party. It just looks different, and it's behaving the exact same way. It's starting to morph into the BC United Party, but this time it's without Kevin Falcon. They don't need to get rid of Falcon because there's nothing to lead at the BC United, or it's all over at the BC Conservatives. So just Falcon, we don't have to get rid of Falcon because we have a new leader of the BC United. It's called John Rustad. Right. So I know I don't
know
job
much
here
about BC politics. That's the thing, right? So this is all news to me.
Sorry. I think that the real story of the housing crisis in Canada begins with British Columbia and Sam Cooper, who I absolutely adore. And I've followed him for years now. And I remember when he first came on the scene. I'm not really old, but I was a young staffer. So you're always excited when there's young journos that come around because, you feel like the youngest one all the time. And if you're doing media like I did, it's excellent to have a new, fresh face. You're kind of excited. Oh, there's a new person to talk to. And I think he'll write the book, but there's so many people that will have to go on the record. And there's so many people that don't want to be sued like myself, right? But there's many more of me that have seen even more than I've seen. And I can tell you that every brown envelope to a BC politician, every brown envelope to a developer or a kickback or a rezoning change or whatever, broke the back of the middle class 1 foot at a time. And they are completely complicit. Because there's no middle class in British Columbia. There's low, and that includes lawyers, people making under $200,000 a year. And then there's uber rich. In order for you to survive in British Columbia, you have to make over $200,000 a year. And that's after taxes. You won't have a vacation. Your kids won't get what they need. So I know this is supposed to be about Canada's reputation, and I've gone the other way. I've gone down to these.
I think it all fits together, though, right? I think it's this kind of
You're
common
gonna edit
theme.
This. You're going to edit this, right?
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not the best editor, so maybe just put most of it out there. But
Okay.
I think kind of the common theme of it is just, it's almost like we can't perceive bad intentions on the parts of other people. It's like with the military. Oh, who would ever attack us? Oh, who would, corrupt a province and make it unaffordable for people? We just kind of, we're nice, so everyone else in the world is nice.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're just constantly getting, just slammed with evidence that no, the world is not like that. You bring in
Well,
people who, oh, they're from a very poor country, they seem very innocent. Well, it turns out a lot of them are extremely anti-Semitic and don't like democracy and freedom of speech at all.
we're
Yeah,
importing we're importing the Gaza Strip here, people. Um,
yeah,
I think there's a laziness to Canadians. It's just a laziness. They know better. Come on, they all know better. They were raised, I mean, I look at my generation, we were raised pretty much by the same morals and ethics. Back in the 80s, every parent cared what the neighbor thought, right? Everybody was still hanging around. People knew each other in the neighborhood. So we were all pretty much raised with the same standard of care, which is essentially don't be dumb. Being Canadian is a privilege, not a right. That's how I was raised. Take care of your own backyard before you offer to pick holes in someone else's, and be a good neighbor. And that means on our street, provincially, nationally, and globally. And don't take government money. That's for people that have way less than you. There's no excuse for it. I mean, I started working when I was 10 years old, not because my parents were poor. I was very blessed. My dad was an entrepreneur. My mom was an entrepreneur, and my dad really made a name for himself. I'm very proud of my dad's legacy, and very proud that I had these parents. But I worked because I wanted to. I started running a little babysitting cartel. It generated a lot of money. And that's actually how I met Gordon Campbell. I used to babysit for his sister's kids. And then I was an au pair during the summer, and then the business community in Vancouver. I was very lucky. I always had a summer job. And then when I came back from university, one of those business guys hired me and then said, "Hey, Gord, Millsy's back." And so it was, I was very lucky, and I really enjoyed, working with my neighbors, but also I was self-sufficient. I bought my own car at 16, and then my dad reimbursed me because you should have a car. It's the first step for adulting. I mean, it wasn't like what we see now, but it was a couple $1,000s. It was like a little VW. I was just so excited. I had wheels, right? And he was right. It was a big part to adulting because the wheels were my freedom. And I began to quickly evolve into, a mature 16, 17-year-old. I understood that I had to pay my car insurance. And our kids today, just especially in British Columbia, can't afford that. They're missing a key part of the first steps of adulting, which is the ownership of a vehicle and the responsibility that comes with that. And, my father, I was very lucky to be raised the way I was, but like I say to Canadians that are my age, come on, we were all raised with the same morals and ethics. We understood what was right and what was wrong, what to expect from our leaders. I didn't, come out of a pod. There's many people, but I think a lot of Canadians, and I see this with my girlfriends that chose to be, to stay at home with their kids. And there's nothing wrong with that. I wish I had had some of that opportunity myself, but they've said, at least there's just too much going on. I can't. It's so violent. It's so messy. It is so drug addicted. And there's all these anti-Semites running around. I don't even want to know. I just want to turtle. And those are people that I know have a great education because I went to the same universities with them. So there's a little bit of that. But to the people on Twitter or the people like Fred Hahn, for example, who are complicit in the dividing of our country and hurting certain religious groups and hurting certain members of the union he's meant to lead, he is complicit in the demise of Canada. He signed the deal with Satan, right? And that's when if this was Harper's government, at that point, we would now probably have that union accountability piece of legislation that everyone forgets about. It was sort of marred it sort of was eclipsed because of the no mask protest thing, which the UK has finally implemented, and everybody hated Harper for, but now want it back. but in there was accountability with unions and Indian chiefs, native chiefs, or sorry, native councils. And forgive my flub on Indian. In the States, it's Indian. They are called Indian chiefs, so it's not meant to be intentionally racist. But any of that accountability would have gone a long way, and it would have provided the powers to legally hold him accountable. And I spoke to somebody in that union last night, and I can tell you they're getting ready to. The union will turn on him. They should have done it. And by the way, this isn't the union executive. The union members are going to file a collective action. I think that I think they will. I should say I think they will. There's a liable element to this. It's very litigious what Han's done. It's also, I believe, criminal. There's a criminality to it. It's hate speech. And the union has deferred responsibility of something that's so fundamentally important to our country. And they've just rejected. They want all the prestige and power of being political movers and shakers. But I can tell you, I know they're watching Reddit like I am, that union is falling in on itself.
It seems like he doesn't want to be a union leader. He just wants to be a full-time anti-Israel activist. So
well,
he should just
he can
resign
be
and
the
go
new
do that.
marshal at the Pride Parade next year, but then he's going to have to deal with the Palestinian guys not wanting him to be on a Pride float. So there's a lot of jobs for Fred Hahn. I just won't get into them right now. But if he wants to know where I think he should go work, I can talk to him about that. Actually, I'd love to drop him in the Middle East on my next trip. I won't be going where I think he needs to go because, well, I don't need to go there. But I really think he should be working on the Gaza Strip. I really do. I would love to see that. He should be volunteering. Some of his penance should be to be placed at an old UNRWA site, if there's still one that's legitimately there. And he should actually have to see how complex and complicated this humanitarian crisis actually is, I also have other jobs I could recommend to him right here in Canada that I think would give him a chance to reset his hubris. And also the fact that he's an anti-Semite correction. He displays anti-Semitism tendencies, anti-Semitic tendencies. But there's really no place for forgiveness on something like this. When I saw what he posted, I was in absolute shock. And I don't know if Canadians are aware, but that story went around the world. I believe it was the UK Sun that first picked it up. Yes, that's tabloidy. It's a broadsheet, right? But they also, like every other media outlet other than Canadian media, they have a running streaming on YouTube. And it was sent to me. I opened it up. And it was sent to me actually by a Liberal MP. Which I was like, oh God.
It's getting bad when even they're like, well, this is going too far now. Holy.
Well, this MP, I think, is about to call for Trudeau's resignation, which is kind of like saying, hey, let's shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're going down. But then I tuned in to see what was going on, and it was a top story. And it really fits into what the UK and European and American media are talking about right now. Canadians are seeing the UK riots. And when I ask Canadians, do you know anything about Manchester Airport? What the incident that happened at Manchester? There's no understanding of that. Yes, having the 3 little girls killed and their dance teacher killed. What was it, 15, 16 days ago now? I know they've had one of the funerals. That was kind of was the gasoline, or it was the match, but the gasoline had been poured at Man Airport, right? And if you Google Manchester Airport, Met Police or airport police, you will be absolutely horrified. So when Fred Hahn goes around and does this, the UK, the broadsheets picked it up first, right? But it's quickly integrated itself into the Telegram or Telegraph, BBC, other places. And then I saw it on France 24. I've seen it show up on the New York Post, and it is another cause for embarrassment in Canada. It's this is when I was speaking to the union leader or union member last night, I said, we may not agree politically. And she goes, oh, I don't care. Don't care. And I said, neither do I, because I'm an old woman now. I don't really care. I mean, the older you get, the less slighted you are, about you better side with me and you better vote with me. But when it matters, we came down in the same place together on Fred Hahn. And I said to her, this must be incredibly traumatizing for you. And it must be incredibly painful for you because the union is supposed to be the safe space. It literally embodies what safe space means, right? That's what it's supposed to be. But she had told me, she sent me a text or a DM of screenshots of being sexually harassed by somebody on the executive, threatening to tell everybody that she was, doing this or that, which didn't happen. Basically a sextortion case is brewing there. I read these messages and he posted them publicly on Facebook. It tells me there has been no accountability in the union world for a really long time, which would explain and definitely justify and verify what the Jewish teachers are saying with the BCTF in Vancouver or in British Columbia. That's the BC Teachers Federation. I think the illusion is starting to just fizzle away. There's another union that's also sinking in for some very similar reasons: bullying, sexism, misogyny, threats of rape. Some asinine, unbelievable things coming from the left, right? And, I think this place is going to go up like a tinderbox. Like the left is really it's intersecting with itself at full velocity. I watched this video that was sent to me by an American colleague, and it was young Black Americans fighting with Palestinians. Mm-hmm. They were breaking apart.
Yeah,
it was a TikTok video, and you've seen it. Yeah, mm-hmm. I think that's the epitome of it. I think it's guys like Adam Zivo from the National Post wrote about how his experience as a gay man, he's lost his community, like the institutions of his community, and what the gay experience has been like now that they have gotten on board with Palestine and other places. And he rightfully predicts, because I agree with him, that will all go terribly wrong, pear-shaped very soon. And it will, yeah. And I just want to say also, as a conservative, I'm a conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative. I don't care what you do in your bedroom. I will always be an ally of any group to protect their religious and personal freedoms, right? Their civil liberties, all of that. I'm a conservative, and I would suggest other conservatives jump on board here. Stop dictating or getting in the you're never going to win abortion. Do you know constitutionally what it would take for me to fight that in court? I have to get every premier on side. It's never going to happen. And to the lefties and liberals that keep telling that story, shut up. It's so false. I did an hour interview with the CBC 2 years ago about this. It is a complicated constitutional challenge that will never happen. Never happen. But I would suggest to conservatives and to the left, in various forms, you're both dictating how people should live their lives. And what people right now really need is they need to know that you're going to get back on track fiscally, economically, because that will change their lives socially. They need to know that the sort of idiot bus is over. The party on their dime is over, and that Canada's about to get really serious. And as a fiscal conservative, I don't really care what you do. What I do believe in, though, is the moment that your behavior changes forever the life of somebody else, criminally, negatively, whatever, that's the moment that I step in. I'm one of those conservatives that really believes there should be only four things the government's really doing for you at any given time. The
Mhm.
idea that they're in the wine business, alcohol business, construction business, whatever. This is just a goddamn nightmare. But I would suggest that we all get more reasonable to the left and to the right. You're both trying to run people's lives. Get out of
That's
their, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I
I'm
think
a bit of a libertarian. I will say that. I'm also I hate to say it, I'm a free speech like zealot. I am. I believe in 100% free speech because you need your free speech to defend those who are being shouted down, right? Free speech is so vital to the defense of the things that Canadians say that are so valuable to them, right? So, I have serious concerns about these social media czar bills that Trudeau's put in. I have big concerns about this is why I'm apoplectic around the government funded media program or fund or whatever it's called, Trudeau's media fund. Um,
well, it's
you
basic
know,
human nature that if you're dependent on the government for money, you're going to skew your coverage towards the political party that's going to keep the money going. And you're probably, well, look at that editorial from a few days ago. I think it was,
yes.
they said, it's the longest editorial they've ever written, ripping into Pierre Polyev as they say that they're not influenced by government subsidies. It's like, well, if
Niagara.
that's the longest one you've ever written, it sounds like you're pretty influenced by what the government's doing. But on the Polyev point too, I noticed it kind of it dovetails with the discussion of how we view ourselves just as opposite of the U.S. I see so many attempts by people, the liberals obviously, to try to compare the conservatives here to the Republicans in the U.S. because obviously American Republicans are not too popular in Canada, and it seems like Polyev has actually avoided a lot of the mistakes that could. I mean, we don't know how the US election is going to go, but the challenges that Republicans are facing, he's been very clear on social issues. Nothing's going to be done there. The government's going to stay away from that. He's going to focus on the
Yeah.
economy. Whereas in the States, you see the Republicans struggling a bit on some of the social issues. Obviously they're doing not so well among the female vote because of Roe versus Wade being struck down and a lot of the anger in the states there. But it's still fascinating that the liberals still try it and it still seems to work with a lot of people. They can't conceive of Canada having any kind of separate political system or different parties on a different place in the political spectrum
Mhm.
without just saying, oh, it's America. We're just doing American politics.
You know why you should be angry about that? Because the only way that the importing of abortion becomes workable or benefits Katie and Justin Trudeau, Katie
Mm-hmm.
Telford and Justin Trudeau is because she's an architect behind that. She always has been. And the only way it benefits the only way it works to get to the benefit of for them, and it's worked quite often before, is that they are relying on Canadians' lack of education and ignorance around the Constitution, provincial powers, charter, all of the fundamental things that we hold true. You know, it when I looked at the legal process of what it would actually take, because each province implements different rules, and quite frankly, the most restrictive provinces are the Liberal provinces.
Yeah, they don't
They are
mention that too often.
No, no. I mean, PEI has been notorious for that behavior for years, right? Um, you know, it's the most conservative provinces that have the best healthcare outcomes and have the greatest access to reproductive services and, more importantly, rape kits, uh, programs, services, immediate care service for sexual crimes and violence, right? I'm very proud of those provinces too. And, Canadians need to understand the lay of the land is very complicated by, there are a lot of Catholic liberals out there running a lot of provincial programs in certain parts of Eastern Canada. Quebec is not as freewheeling with abortion or we call them reproductive services, as one would believe. There's also a heavy push towards not advertising these services because of the heavy Muslim or Islamic culture in certain provinces like Quebec. There's a lot of fights on the ground these activists or Katie Telford could really get involved in if she really gave a darn fig about it. But when I looked at, if you were to try and put together your version of sort of a constitutional takedown, you'd have to go province by province by province because of the way the implementation is, and that there is no precedent federally upholding the abortion law. There is no abortion law. It is an agreement between the provinces and the
This will
feds
get
that
clipped if I ever run for office one day. They'll clip, oh, Spencer Fernando strategizing on how to. You just try to think in the future. Well, the
yeah.
full
First of
context
all,
is, oh, nobody cares about context. Although by then it'll be 1 second clips on people's attention spans. So
I know we better bury this part to
yeah.
it. I realize I'm just laying the groundwork for. I know who she is. I won't mention her, but she's just a zealot of the anti-abortion. I'm like, lady, out of the percentage of women that have abortions in Canada, it's really important to note that well over 60% are having abortions because they're forced to. People don't even want to realize the amount of sexual crime that's attached to the abortion story. I've been privy to being part of groups where women have shared these stories because I've worked quite. I myself was a victim of domestic violence, so I got involved. Once I got rid of the anger, I got involved in my community, and I was very lucky to have a police chief that it did involve me and saw that that was the way to empower me. It took a long time to get there, but I got there. But within the domestic violence, I can't tell you how many rapes are happening within marriages. So racially marginalized women are predominantly looking for, or not predominantly, I don't want to make it sound like they're shopping for abortions. That's not how it's going. But they deal with a tremendous amount of sexual violence and physical violence outside of sexual violence often. They do not want to bring other children in. They're trying to find an escape route. There's a whole community that reproductive services and domestic violence services connect with or connect women with. And I don't think to use it as a political football, as Trudeau and Katie Telford have, is very shameful. I'm ashamed of both sides of that extremism. I think, first of all, Canadians need to know it's a 100% lie. If a province turned, and you'd have to be some sort of kamikaze politician, I can't even figure out what politician out of all the ones we have right now that would have even thought about getting rid of reproductive services in their province. It was
not
not a
even
Daniel.
popular among conservatives. Every time they poll them, it's like 65, 70, 75% of conservatives say just leave it alone. You can't be the small government party and then say, oh, except for this extremely intimate, issue for women, that we're going to interfere with that. But everywhere else, oh yeah, total freedom. So that's what people don't understand, though. The polling here is not the same as in the United States. The Conservative Party is not the same as the Republican Party, but it's just all oversimplified.
Look what's just happened down in the States. The abortion pills are rolling back onto the shelves because, Trump doesn't have the will either. Trump has no interest in social issues. He's obsessed with Joe Biden. He keeps calling out Joe Biden.
It. Where are you,
yeah,
Joe?
He's still talking about illegal.
It was so unfair.
He's talking about how it's unconstitutional karma or unconstitutional Kamala. And because that's what they think, right? He made it really clear. And then the other day, 3 of the 4 states that were most complicit in the abolishment of those services or drugs reversed course, and the pills came rolling back. I would say that abortion services, as we know them in Canada, are still relatively inhumane. There's a lot of not just physical pain, but there's a lot of unnecessary pain through the process. And women are still, I know people say this, but women are tough. The things and the choices that women have to go through every single day. And it gets worse and worse, whether you're more racialized or not. And I know people are going to say, I thought Alise Mills was a big time conservative. She sounded like a liberal wokey, but I care about my gender. And there's a lot of men trying to displace us. And, when I find out that a man can get gender redefining hormones and my friends and I can't get menopause therapy if we choose, women's health services are garbage in this country. I can get whatever I want in the States for $1,000 a month. That's premium healthcare too. So women are under attack. I stand with women in sports. I stand with women in healthcare, whatever women need so that they have a fair fight, because there's so much more upon us. And now that we don't have the support of the left, the feminist movement is changing, it's evolving. I mean, I'd be the first person to tell whatever premier that was that they were incredibly naive and that I was going to be on the other side of that fight and I could win it. But, not to give you a playbook, but you'd literally have to go through the territories, the provinces, and pretty much you have to go province by province because it's not necessarily a federal service, right? There's no constitutional connotation to it. And the reason why no government has gone through the legislative process to make it part of your right as a woman is because nobody wants to unsettle the apple cart and start kicking off a bunch of the, crazies. What I'd be more worried about is getting these people to get off the abortion thing and start worrying about child poverty and our increase in food banks. Do something that's bloody well useful that makes women feel they can have more children. Mm-hmm. Do things that if you want family planning or you support the family, then get out there and support the family. I've said this to conservative men. Don't go out there and tell a woman how to run her body when you're not exhibiting those family values yourself. I've said it to Catholic liberal men too. If you really want to support the family, then make it easier for me to have more children. And I remember saying this once, and then Harper retorted back to me, child tax benefit. Mm-hmm. You can have more kids.
Well, that's what divides the people who I think have good intentions and who actually do support families and those who just see it as a way to control women, right? That's the real divide, whether someone just says, oh, we're going to stop you from doing something, or we're going to offer, proactive ways to make it easier for people. So it's,
by the way, Stephen Harper was holding my purse while we were having a photo while he said that. So I just want to say he was a good equal dance partner that night. And, there's lots of, I just wish people would stop being so basic. I now sound like like my daughter. Don't be so basic, but people are basic. Don't be basic. Take that entrepreneurial spirit that I know we all have. It's just dormant, and apply it to politics and policy. This is why I'm inherently so disappointed. It's just so basic and so manipulative and so performative. And there's so many Canadians falling for it. And the joke is on the Canadians because Katie Telford and Justin Trudeau are laughing at how ignorant you are to believe that abortion is really a siren to go off here, that it's really like all going to crumble. And every time I see a tweet go out by I've actually unfollowed certain people because I can't follow stupid people. Because if you really legitimately believe this, and if you don't, that means that you are really playing into performative politics. And quite frankly, any of those anti-abortion tweets that Telford and Trudeau put out should be considered pre-writ spending.
Well, it's the same as how when there were mass shootings in the United States, the Liberals would always come up with some new gun policy in Canada. They obviously assume that Canadians are not differentiating between this took place in the United States and this is Canada, and they assume we have the same gun laws. And it's disappointing to see, certainly.
Well, I agree. I think there isn't one thing that Canada has done in the last few years that I've been incredibly impressed by, from everything from how we left our Afghan interpreters, to which my stomach curdled. If anyone's been to a war zone, Middle East, whatever, these guys are going to be dead, or they're going to run really fast and they're going to run often.
Well, who would ever help us again if we're ever in a similar situation? Who would ever, we go to someone and say, hey, you're going to take a risk. People around you will hate you, but you're going to help Canada. They'll say, why? You'll just leave me the second it's not convenient.
Yeah, our defense minister has a rap sheet as long as my arm, and he's still there too. Stealing honor, he's stealing valor. He's done that. Yep. Harjit Sajjan, proclaiming that he was in war that he wasn't in, that he had a role that he didn't have.
The architect, he called himself, I think.
Yeah, it's stealing valor. It's akin to when someone says that they've done a tour of duty and they haven't done a tour of duty. my very first job actually was communications for D&D, Department of National Defense, and I had to do an audit of Trenton, which I'll never forget. So that sort of bookmarks the first stage of my career. And, I've worked with Wounded Warriors. I've been an executive director there too. So I really believe in valor and honor. And this latest situation with the minister pulling out his ethnic group, his people, which is ridiculous. Another case of dividing us amongst between our race and our religion. Canadians are Canadians are Canadians. Black, white, purple, doesn't matter. Gay, Muslim, Christian, Jew, doesn't matter. Most of our families are made up of at least two religions, right? I know I am. I'm Jewish and Christian and all of those things. And I just cannot believe that you've abandoned the people that served us, and the lies that were told. And you heard about it for a few days and then you never heard about it again. And then the minister had also been involved in several other scandals. We forgot that he was involved in complaints of harassment as well. He has a rap sheet that is dishonorable, right? He has no honor, and he stole that. He stole valor. And I think stolen valor is a non-negotiable position. That to me is sort of, you remove that person right away, and no wonder people don't really think much about the military if that's the example. He's a terrible example. But maybe that is sort of a reflection of how broken, how bad it is in Canada's military right now. It also shows that Trudeau doesn't put much emphasis on the military if you're going to trust somebody that is deceitful.
Well, yeah, he clearly doesn't care. How do you say, oh yeah, we'll hit the 2% target by 2032, and then in that same year you've given out probably 50 to 60 billion in subsidies for EV companies and battery makers. Well, obviously you're fine deficit spending. You're fine spending tens of billions of dollars. So.
And money will be, we might as well have lit it on fire and had a really good party, because that's where it ended up anyway, was just, it's gone. People have run with it. We'll never get the money stolen. And Canada has had her valor stolen as well. I think that translates. There's correlating little vignettes that are happening. The scandal of oh my God, is there one Liberal that hasn't had a scandal? We might as well start with who hasn't versus who has, because even our former ethics officer, who I never really thought was a particularly strong character, and I've forgotten his last name, but his first name's Mario. He was on Twitter the other day just lambasting the Trudeau government for their lack.
Was it Dion?
Yeah, maybe something like that. He was lambasting the Trudeau government for their lack of accountability, and I thought, oh my God, are you joking? The greatest falls and the biggest investigations happened while you were in office. You twerp.
He's very vocal now that he has no power, which is interesting.
Well, they fired him, right? And he says he left. He's got a big salary or a big payout. So, he probably doesn't have a lot else going on, but I don't know anyone that thinks he's superior or a good fit or has a lot of ethics. I can't name one thing that I ever saw from him where I went, all right, now we've got a decision that I can live with, right? I did a little poll before, and I've had to make my Twitter account private because of some of the work that I'm doing, and I just think it's important that I still keep it. But I put out before I closed off my account or made my account private, I put out a little Twitter poll: who trusts the ethics office? And who doesn't? And it was just like immediate. It was like, and people are like, are you really saying that you don't? I'm like, these are colleagues of mine. And I said, would you grow some? Your lobbying world is so ridiculous. You guys are just grow some. Like, this ethics office is not to be trusted, not because they're on the take, but because they have no teeth, right? they, you know,
Well, the fines are hilarious. It's like, oh, fined with
$2.
$250. Oh yeah, you got them. Yeah, they're not going to do that again. Yeah.
Well, I know. And then I don't understand why, it takes so long for the RCMP to come in. I've never seen a slower service. I've never seen a slower criminal response. But this is also how they're managing the drug issues. And this is how they're managing, you know, gangs and gang crimes. And I mean, Toronto and Vancouver are rife with it, right? This is how they be managing auto theft. Yeah, just leave your keys on the front door and
I saw
just,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I
Just
mean,
avoid a fight, make it easy for them. Oh,
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Thanks,
Don't get
police.
involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's up to civilians now to basically arm themselves with whatever you can find at the Walmart, depending on where you live. In Prince George, you'll probably get a rifle. But in Toronto, it might be bear spray. And you're just sort of, okay. And, I think Canadians, ironically, will start becoming very American in their want for home protection, security. You'll start to maybe see more calls for gated communities. This is really sort of the transcending into or whatever Canada's going to become in the next 5 to 10 years. But are we prepared? This country is not prepared for what's happening outside of its borders. It's not not prepared for what's happening over its borders, and it's not prepared for what's happening inside of its borders. And I mean, I really feel, and I don't understand why Canadians won't do this. Americans do it all the time. There are 2 clauses in our Constitution that allow me to sue the government. I really do think we should sue the Trudeau government for compensation on the Green Fund and for no access to healthcare. Why are we not doing collective action? I'd do it for free. I think we should put a pact together. I mean, if the Conservatives hadn't screwed up the Election Act before they left, we'd have super PACs we could play with. And then we could be more honest about who's actually dabbling in politics. But I'd love to put a super PAC together, put a collective action out, and keep suing this Trudeau government. And hopefully I'd be able to get some compensation for taxpayers. And I divvy it up to the families that have lost family members due to waits or whatever. I think we could win. I also think there is a case to be made for the criminality around how the Green Fund was distributed, and also the Arrive Canada app. There's a criminality that is so obvious. I think, I'd love to see the Canadian Constitution Fund get involved in something like that. But maybe if more people stood up like what I'm doing today and saying something, maybe it would motivate Canadians to go, oh, so that was illegal? So wait time is actually unconstitutional? Yes.
Yeah,
And
people just feel they have to put up with whatever's happening. Oh, that's just how it is.
Well, here's something I want Canadians to remember. If you've been working since the age of 19, 18, and now you're 25, you've already paid your taxes 5 years ahead. So think about that. And think about how very little most of us use the healthcare system. You've probably, if you had been putting this into savings account or into a private insurance policy, you probably had accumulated over $1 million in services you haven't used, right? They are counting on the fact that you won't use them versus proactively preparing for the use. And that's what's got Canadians hot under the collar. And when I tell them that you have actually prepaid, so if you count out their age, I mean, it depends on who you're talking to, of course, but you can pretty much easily give them a figure of what they've paid into. And they'll start to, if you want Canadians to do math real quick, it's when you tell them how much they put into the system. And that's just your healthcare dollars. Think about the other taxes you paid. What other services are you not getting? There's more and more government and less service. That's not necessarily happening elsewhere. I mean, you're just not, for all the problems the United States have, governors are very aware they're on tenterhooks. They don't stay in one spot very long.
No. Half of them are planning to run for president, so they want to do a good job in their state. Yeah.
Well, and also Americans are very to their governors. EB's complaining about online harassment. You should see what some of the governors get. They're local. Then you got your state senators. They're very aware. There's a self-awareness that American politicians have, whether you agree with their politics or not. And I'll say this, there's only a handful on either side that have this hubris and ignorance that is outstanding to me. But the general core, from regular bluegrass Dems to Republicans, they're very self-aware. And they're much more accountable. Like I just watching a couple of months ago, I was in North Carolina. I was watching a press conference, and it was about that horrible shooting that had happened just outside Chapel Hill, and the accountability by the sheriff's department, the state government, investigators. You'd never see a demonstration of transparency and a willingness to continue to answer questions the way that they have. And I've given North Carolina as an example, but I've seen it in LA. LA is actually not that great, bad example, but I've seen it. And like Texas is well known for that justice, transparency thing. I always felt very safe living in Texas, very safe. And I want people to know that Americans get very passionate, but they're not fighting over the fence with each other. In fact, I've lived in communities that have had the Walmart general manager, super big Republican, and the guy down the street who was a doctor that was a super big Hillary person. I wanted to question his mental health, but he didn't want me to test him. But we would hang out, and what was great is that the lawyers, doctors, the general manager from Walmart, and the guy that owned the little store on the corner, we all lived in the same community. We could all afford to live in the same community. And we talked politics, but it was nothing the way that this Canadian fever dream of American politics really is. There's much more agreement than there is disagreement. And where they often join forces on what they consider to be incompetence of government officials, right? They'll work together to get things done. And I really admire that about the Americans. If they hear of a child going without food, within 15 minutes, you've got money coming into a GoFundMe account. Where is that child? We're going to feed them. And these people may not have very much of their own as well.
Yeah, they feel responsible for solving problems themselves, as opposed to saying, the government's going to do something about it later on. So.
Yeah, I will say another thing that has come up is the convoy issue, and the disparity between how anti-Semites protesting versus, and media calls them pro-Palestinian. I call it pro-Hamas anti-Semitism, because there's such a violent element to it as well. And the calls for the murder of Jews and the murder of America as well. That's always and then the ISIS flag was a nice touch, right? So state-sponsored terrorism has come to Canada, but I've had many Americans and a former U.S. diplomat or UK diplomat who was here in Canada for quite a while, quite a few years ago now, asked me how the convoy isn't going through court. I faced criminal charges, and this is happening. And I said, well, that's your Canada for you, right? And, they were quite surprised. The British diplomat, former diplomat, he was quite surprised to find out that the bank accounts had been frozen. And I said, that was just the beginning. There was Bill C-10, which was the shut your mouth on social media unless you're saying, yay, Trudeau. Melanie Joly was the first original social media czar. Then that sort of tied into this czar for the middle class. And then C-11 and C-18 showed up. And that was the beginning of stripping away freedom of speech, freedom of religious freedoms, seemingly approving of hate speech, government controlled media. I mean, Australia has basically emulated what Canada has done as well. So it's a very similar context, and they're both considered to be failed states right now. So